You're listening to Inner Echo Stories. Please like and subscribe for more interesting stories. Streetlights zipped by the windshield, creating hazy trails of light in the late night. Jack gripped the steering wheel, his heart filled with a hard-to-describe floating feeling. The thick envelope in his left inside jacket pocket seemed to radiate warmth, burning against his chest. "You're the best driver I've ever had, Jack." His boss Richard's voice still echoed in his ear, full of satisfaction after the long business trip. "Here, consider this a gift for your wife and kid. Take her to buy a nice dress." Jack remembered the moment he took the envelope, his fingers trembling slightly. He had bowed his head in thanks, his words choked with emotion. His boss didn't know, but that unexpected bonus was a godsend for him, for Sarah, and for little Lily. It was enough to pay off the last of their small debts, buy his daughter the tricycle she'd been longing for, and maybe even save a little bit. He smiled to himself, imagining the bright look in Sarah's eyes when she heard the news, and Lily's giggle when her dad would lift her and spin her around. The car turned onto the small road leading to his old apartment complex. That warm, happy feeling was still intact, until his phone vibrated on the dashboard. An unknown number, but not completely unfamiliar. The screen lit up with a short English text message. "Is Richard home tonight?" Jack's heart sank. He recognized it immediately. Elena, the boss's wife. A cold sweat began to seep down his spine. He knew Richard wasn't going home tonight. He had smiled faintly, telling Jack to drive straight to a luxury serviced apartment in another district, where the familiar silhouette of a young woman was waiting. Jack was just the driver. His job was to drive, to stay silent, to do as the boss said. Those private matters he always tried to push out of his mind, pretending to be blind and deaf. But now the boss's wife was asking. His palms were soaked. How should he answer? Tell the truth? He was afraid of making the boss's wife angry, of causing offense, afraid that the boss's kindness today would vanish if he said one wrong word. But lying? Should he? After a moment of hesitation, his fingers slid over the keyboard, typing each word carefully. "No, ma'am, he's still at the airport lounge. Flight got delayed." The message had just been sent when a reply came immediately, swift as an arrow. "Good. Come by the house at 10. I need you to pick up something for him. It's urgent." Jack glanced at the clock. 9:45 p.m. Boss Richard's house in the Villa District was more than 20 minutes away. He bit his lip. Something urgent. The boss's wife's order sounded no different from a command. He turned into the familiar alley, sighing with slight relief when his own small house came into view. The bedroom on the second floor still had its light on. The warm yellow light shone through the curtains like a welcoming beacon of safety. Sarah was still waiting up for him. A wave of guilt suddenly surged up. He had just turned off the car engine, about to open the door and hurry inside to hug his wife and daughter, when his phone vibrated again. This time it was Sarah. Her message popped up with words that made his heart clench. "Hey, honey. Dinner's in the microwave. Lily kept asking for Daddy. Drive safe, I love you." Attached was a picture of little Lily, having fallen asleep in bed, still clutching her old teddy bear. Jack sat frozen in the car. On one side was the warm light of home, a loving message full of waiting. On the other side was a cold, commanding message from that luxurious villa with its vague, urgent excuse. He looked at Elena's message again. It was now 9:47. A heavy sigh escaped his chest. His trembling hand grabbed the key and twisted it forcefully. The car engine started, the growling sound harsh in the quiet night. "I'm just going to pick something up," Jack whispered to reassure himself, as if Sarah could hear. "I'll be right back. 15, 20 minutes tops. Tomorrow morning, I'll show Sarah the bonus, and our whole family will go out." He turned the wheel. The car slowly backed out of the parking spot and turned around. The headlights shone straight down the empty road leading out of the alley. He didn't dare look up at the bedroom window again. His heart pounded so hard, he thought he could hear it echoing in the silent car. The car sped away, leaving behind the warm yellow light in the night, heading towards the cold white streetlights of the upscale Villa District. The iron gate slowly opened with a soft creak, like a giant jaw yawning open. Jack drove into the courtyard, his heart beating a little faster than before. The massive villa in front of him was shrouded in darkness, with only one large window on the ground floor emitting a dim, weak yellow light, like the last lantern on a night ship. He stood before the heavy wooden door, his finger trembling as he pressed the doorbell. The bell echoed coldly deep inside the house. The door opened. Jack's breath caught. Elena stood there, not in her usual nightclothes. She wore a short, smoky gray silk dress, so thin the yellow light from behind could pass through it, faintly outlining the curves of her body. Her blonde hair was wet, plastered to her neck and bare shoulders, droplets falling onto her pale, flawless skin. She was about his age, maybe even a little younger, but her beauty belonged to another world, sharp, meticulously groomed, exactly the kind of decorative treasure Boss Richard had bragged about to business partners. The woman everyone knew was the reason Richard's first wife left was now standing here, on her own cold throne. "Come in, Jack, it's cold outside." Elena's voice was husky, tinged with fatigue. Jack stepped inside, slightly overwhelmed by the scent of expensive perfume, sweet but slightly pungent, lingering in the air. The wooden door closed behind him with a clear, decisive click. The living room was vast and oppressively empty. There was nothing that needed picking up. Just an open bottle of red wine and 2 crystal-clear glasses on the table under the sickly yellow lamplight. "I couldn't sleep," Elena said, gliding softly toward the table, her silk dress rustling. "Have a drink with me? Consider it payment for keeping me company." Jack unconsciously took a step back, his back hitting the icy cold door. I have to drive, ma'am, and Sarah, my wife, is waiting." Elena turned, giving a slight smile. The laugh held no joy, just sounded like a long sigh. She poured wine into a glass. The dark, red liquid flowing under the light looked like blood. "One glass won't kill you." Then she looked up, her green eyes like cold jewels piercing straight into Jack. "Or are you afraid of me?" The question was a challenge. Jack felt his throat go dry. He shook his head not to answer, but as a panicked reflex. Finally, he stepped forward and slumped into the chair opposite her, keeping his distance. His hand gripped the glass pushed toward him, as if seeking an anchor. Elena said nothing more, just took a sip of wine and stared into space. Her voice suddenly became flat, as if telling someone else's story. "You know, Richard married me because I was young and pretty. It's that simple. I was his most pampered mistress." Jack stayed silent, his fingers tightening around the glass. "And now," she continued, her tone more bitter, "I'm sitting here in this luxurious tomb, waiting for the fate of the ex-wife to befall me. Poetic justice, don't you think, Jack? Isn't it funny?" She laughed, a short, dry sound, and 2 tears traced paths down her cheeks, leaving glistening trails. "He has a new mistress, younger, prettier. I know everything. Don't bother hiding it from me. I know the smell of betrayal by now." These weren't weak complaints. They were cold knives, drawn from her own wounds and inadvertently pointed at Jack's vague sense of pity. He looked at her, the supposed home wrecker, now trapped in her own spoils of war, lonely and withering. A jumble of feelings rose. His initial judgment faded, replaced by a stupid sense of pity. I'm sorry to hear that, ma'am," Jack mumbled, his voice tiny. Elena sobbed softly, her shoulders shaking. An instinctive move, Jack leaned forward to grab the tissue box on the table to hand to her. At that moment, an ice-cold hand rested on the back of his hand. Jack jolted, looking up. Elena's face was now far too close. Tears, the pungent smell of wine, the sweet perfume, and her warm breath all mixed together, creating a toxic allure. His mind went blank for a second. Then the kiss came. It was desperate, greedy, and full of possession. All Jack could hear was the thundering of his own heart, and the feeling of her soft, cold lips pressing against his. His reason screamed once and then went dead, buried under a flood of chaotic emotions. The foolish pride of being needed by a woman from that world, blind pity, and a dark desire stirred by the nearly irresistible beauty right in front of him. He didn't initiate it, but his body didn't resist either. His arms, as if with a mind of their own, wrapped around her back, feeling the fragile silk and the warmth beneath. Everything that followed happened like in a delirium. Elena led. They fell onto the thick, soft Persian rug, sinking into it. The dim yellow light was just enough for Jack to see the outline of her body moving beneath the flimsy fabric. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to banish the image of Sarah waiting in the kitchen and Lily sleeping soundly with her bear. Just for a minute, a wicked little voice in his head whispered, "A minute to forget everything." But there was no real pleasure, only the guilty escape into a pitch-black void. He felt himself falling freely, but his limbs couldn't find anything to hold on to. When it was over, a terrifying silence filled the large room. Jack lay on his back, staring up at the high ceiling with its intricate moldings. The first feeling that washed over him was nothing but a horrifying emptiness. Immediately, it was filled by a wave of regret sharper and more cutting than anything he'd ever known. The unfamiliar perfume of wine, the smell of wine, and the strange scent of another body on his skin became disgusting, making his stomach twist. In less than 15 minutes of weakness and confusion, he had just thrown everything away with his own hands. Jack scrambled up, hurriedly grabbing his clothes scattered on the rug. His limbs trembled violently, as if chilled to the bone. He dressed hastily, his fingers stiff and clumsy, fumbling with the buttons. Elena lay on her side, propped up on an elbow, watching him with a look that was half pitying, half triumphant. I have to go, Jack stammered, his voice hoarse, eyes fixed on the floor, not daring to look at her. Yeah, Elena sighed, her voice becoming terrifyingly calm, as if what just happened was nothing special. Go on. Go back to your nice, gentle nurse wife. Jack felt reprieved, quickly turning and stumbling toward the door. His heart pounded. He just wanted to get out of this place as fast as possible. Just as his hand touched the icy doorknob, Elena's voice rang out from behind, cold and sharp, each word clear as a dagger stabbing into his back. But Jack, we just burned the only bridge you had together. Do you think you can turn back now? We're accomplices, you understand that, right? The car sped through the empty night streets, Jack driving like a man possessed. His hands on the wheel were slick with cold sweat. Every red light he stared at his own hands, imagining he could still smell that sharp perfume. Elena's final words echoed in his head. Accomplice. Those two words twisted in his gut. He parked in front of his house and looked up at the bedroom window. The light was off. A pang of hollow relief hit him. Sarah and Lily were asleep, but it was immediately replaced by an even deeper remorse. At least if they were awake, he could see her. He could tell some kind of lie. Now, this silence felt like a silent condemnation. Stepping inside, the familiar warmth was still there in the air, but it couldn't chase away the cold, deep in his bones. On the small dining table, his favorite meal was neatly covered with clear plastic wrap, careful down to the corners. Next to it was a lemon-yellow sticky note with Sarah's soft, tidy handwriting. I warmed it up, but you weren't home. Hope everything's okay. Love you. Jack picked up the note, and those simple words suddenly felt sharp, stabbing straight into his heart. He gasped for air as if someone were squeezing his chest. Hope everything's okay. Well, he had just betrayed it all. His hand shook, crumpling the note in his fist. He shuffled into the bathroom, shut the door, and turned the shower on full blast with scalding hot water. Steam filled the room. He scrubbed his body hard with soap, scrubbing until his skin was raw and red. He rinsed his mouth, washed his face, let the water pour over his head. But the feeling remained. The sensation of Elena's cold lips like an invisible stain pressed onto his own. Her perfume seemed to have seeped into every fiber of his clothes, into his skin, impossible to wash away. Just as he stepped out of the bathroom, wrapped only in a towel, his phone on the counter buzzed once. Jack's heart hammered against his ribs. He grabbed the phone, an unknown number, a picture message. His numb finger tapped to open it. The image loaded crystal clear. It was a photo of the low table in Elena's living room. On the glass tabletop, his crystal wine glass still had a little liquid at the bottom, showing smudged fingerprints clearly. Right next to it, lying starkly on the cold glass, was his simple silver wedding band. And in the corner of the photo, the photographer had skillfully or intentionally captured a part of a navy blue shirt sleeve, the exact color of the shirt he'd worn tonight. Jack felt his limbs go ice cold, breaking out in a sweat despite just leaving the steamy bathroom. He scrolled down to the accompanying message. A memorable night. I have more pictures, much clearer ones. We'll talk soon. P.S. Give my regards to Sarah. Jack's blood ran cold. He went pale, his lips trembling. This was no longer a vague verbal threat. This was a visual indictment. She had planned it all, from photographing the scene to the detail of his wedding ring that he didn't even remember taking off, to the final line, a knife aimed straight at Sarah, at his home. Give my regards to Sarah. It was sickeningly sweet and utterly malicious. In a panic, he hit delete, deleting both the message and the image. But the action was as meaningless as trying to wash himself clean under the shower. The photo was saved somewhere on Elena's phone, probably in the cloud. He slumped onto the cold tile floor, knees drawn up, head in his hands. His breathing was heavy, ragged in the still night. He was an accomplice. And now his fellow accomplice held the noose tight around his neck. Morning light filtered through the thin curtains, stinging Jack's bleary eyes. He had barely slept a wink. Every time he closed his eyes, the image of his wedding ring lying alone on the glass tabletop reappeared. He went downstairs to the kitchen, trying to act normal. Sarah was making coffee, her small frame in an old nightgown, hair loose. She turned and smiled at him, her eyes bright and gentle as always. "I have an early shift this morning. Remember to take Lily to preschool, okay?" Sarah said, her voice morning hoarse. "Yeah." Jack nodded, his own voice faintly hoarse. He picked up the glass of orange juice she had just squeezed for him, his palm damp with sweat. Little Lily sat in her high chair, diligently eating her oatmeal, giggling innocently now and then. The peaceful scene now played out before Jack like a slow-motion film, beautiful and heartbreakingly fragile. He knew he didn't deserve it. He knew he was about to shatter it all. The doorbell rang. Sarah looked up, slightly surprised. "Who's here so early?" She wiped her hands on her apron and walked toward the front door. Jack stood frozen in the kitchen, the glass of orange juice in his hand. His heart suddenly stopped, then began to hammer like a war drum. A terrible sense of foreboding seized his whole body. He heard Sarah open the door, and then a sweet, clear, all too familiar and terrifyingly fake-friendly voice floated in from the doorway. "Hello, Sarah. So sorry to drop by unannounced like this. I was passing through the neighborhood and suddenly remembered I should return the pen Jack left at my place last night." Jack went rigid. From the kitchen, through the open doorway, he saw the elegant silhouette of Elena standing on his doorstep. She wore expensive-looking athleisure wear, her hair in a high ponytail, looking perfectly fresh and beautiful. In her hand, held between long, slim fingers with crimson nail polish, was a black fountain pen, not his. Sarah was a little flustered, but still offered a polite smile. "Oh, Elena, it's no trouble at all. Please, come in." Jack didn't hear anything else. Violent ringing roared in his ears. The whole world shrank down to just the image of Elena standing there, with a friendly smile but eyes cold as ice, looking right past Sarah toward him in the small kitchen. The glass of orange juice in Jack's hand suddenly slipped. It hit the kitchen floor with a shattering, piercing sound, sending orange juice and glass shards flying everywhere, soaking his bare feet and leaving a bitter yellow stain on the floor, like his own guilt had just been spilled and exposed in broad daylight. Time passed in a state of paralyzing tension after that. Jack lived like a puppet, waiting for the axe to fall. His phone was always on silent, and every vibration made his heart skip. But Elena didn't call or send more threatening messages. That silence was even more frightening. Then, one evening, while the family was watching TV, the doorbell rang again. Jack looked at Sarah, panic in his eyes. Sarah smiled faintly and stood up, probably the neighbor borrowing something. But when she opened the door, the tall, elegant figure of Elena appeared again, holding an expensive-looking box of pastries tied with an elaborate ribbon. "Hello, Sarah," Elena chirped, her voice sweet as syrup. "I was in the area. Wanted to thank Jack for working so hard lately." Sarah was a bit taken aback, but remained courteous. "Oh, Elena, please come in. That's really not necessary." Jack stood up, his limbs feeling like concrete. He stood there, watching Elena step into a small home with graceful steps and that familiar perfume. She was like a leopard stepping into a rabbit hutch. Elena sat on the old couch, still smiling. She placed the pastry box on the table, her eyes flicking to Jack for a split second, full of meaning. "Jack has been such a help to Richard lately," she said to Sarah in a confiding tone. "Over at my place, discussing work every evening, so diligent." Jack swallowed hard, his throat dry as sand. He wanted to object, to say it was only that one time, but the words choked in his throat. One night he was so tired," Elena continued, casual, as if telling an everyday story. "He actually fell asleep right on the sofa at my place. It was chilly. I even had to get a blanket for him so he wouldn't catch a cold." Bang! A short, dry explosion went off in Jack's head. He felt the blood rush to his face, then drain away, leaving him numb. She was painting a completely different picture, a false intimacy that sounded perfectly plausible. "Fell asleep. Got a blanket." Those gentle words were like razor blades, carving the truth into an insinuating story. Jack didn't dare look at Sarah. He could only glance quickly. Sarah's face remained calm. She smiled and nodded at Elena. "That's him. always losing track of time when he's working. Thank you for looking out for him." But Jack saw it in Sarah's bright, perceptive eyes. A flash of something flickered for an instant, a pause, a hint of scrutiny, then it vanished. Sarah was still her composed self. Elena, as if not finished, looked around the small, humble living room, so different from her villa, and sighed, her tone full of sympathy. "Your home is so cozy. I'm really envious of Jack. Working hard and coming home to a wife and child waiting. Not like my Richard, always traveling. Home is just a hotel." She paused, took a sip of the tea Sarah had just poured, and continued, as if by chance, "Luckily, Jack has been dropping by lately, keeping me company when I'm lonely. He even complimented me, said I make excellent coffee." Each of her words was like a drop of poison into Jack's mind. "Dropping by lately? Keeping me company? Said I make excellent coffee." Harmless details added one by one, creating a hazy picture that made his presence at her place seem frequent and more familiar than necessary. Jack felt his throat parched and bitter. He wanted to scream, to stand up and throw her out, but his legs were nailed to the floor. The fear of the photos, of losing his job, of a scandal that could destroy his little family had locked down any resistance. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Elena stood to leave. She said goodbye to Sarah warmly, and when she turned to Jack, she gave only a slight nod, with a look of knowing triumph only he could see. "Accomplice?" that look seemed to say again. The door closed. The sound of Elena's high heels faded down the hallway. The room sank into a thick, heavy silence, worse than when she was there. Sarah said nothing. She quietly stood and began to clear the teacup Elena had used. She carried it into the kitchen. Jack heard the sound of running tap water, the careful, slow clink of the cup against the sink. Each sound was painfully clear, like counting the seconds in the tension. Jack stood in the living room, his back against the cold wall. He felt like he was standing on the edge of a cliff, and Sarah was slowly turning her back, about to walk away. The storm he feared had finally arrived, not with thunder, but with a deadly, simmering quiet. Then Sarah walked out of the kitchen. She wiped her hands on her apron, movements perfectly normal, but her face wasn't. Those bright eyes were now veiled with a cold mist, looking straight at Jack. She wasn't angry, she wasn't screaming. That calm was 100 times more terrifying. She walked slowly over and stopped in front of him. Sarah's voice came out, soft, too soft, like a wisp of smoke. "She's very friendly and very pretty, too." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. "I hear their house is very luxurious." Then she looked up, her gaze probing, piercing, making Jack want to look away. "Honey?" Sarah asked, her voice still gentle, but each word like a stone thrown at his chest. "Lately? You've been going to her house quite often, haven't you?" Crash! Jack felt the ground crack beneath his feet. His heart skipped a beat, then raced, erratic and painful. All the air was sucked from the room. He looked into his wife's eyes, the place that always held trust and love. And now he saw doubt, pain, and a cold, clear-headedness. His last fortress, Sarah's trust, the wall he thought was strongest, had been breached by Elena's sugar-coated, poisonous words. And for the first time in his life, Jack realized something terrifying. The fear of losing the one you love is infinitely worse than the fear of a shameful secret being exposed. Because a secret can be buried, but a heart that has begun to doubt is hard to mend. The days that followed turned Jack's home into a silent trench war. Sarah didn't ask any more questions, but the warm affection from before was replaced by a polite distance. Every meal was a heavy silence, broken only by the clink of cutlery and Lily's innocent chatter. When their eyes accidentally met, Sarah's would immediately dart away, as if avoiding something burning. Jack felt isolated within his own fortress. Meanwhile, Boss Richard remained as kind and respectable as ever. He still praised Jack for his careful work, sometimes even asking about his family. That kindness now became an enormous weight on Jack's conscience. It was like a shiny coat of paint over rotten wood inside, making him feel even more despicable and powerless. Then one lunchtime, as Jack was eating a takeout box alone in his car, his phone vibrated. A message from Elena's number. "Richard is on a 3-day business trip. Come to my house this afternoon at 3. We have something important to discuss." Jack's heart clenched. Cold sweat broke out on his palms. He typed back, fingers trembling over each letter. "Ma'am, I have family matters this afternoon. Can we make it another time?" He sent it, clinging to a sliver of hope. But just 5 minutes later, the phone rang. It was her number calling. Jack took a deep breath, answered, his voice shaky. "Hello?" Elena's voice on the other end was no longer sweet or bitter. It was sharp, cold, slicing through the air. "If you don't come, I'll call Richard right now. I'll tell him everything, from start to finish, about that night you comforted me." Think about it. Between a lonely wife needing sympathy and a driver who might have gotten the wrong idea, who do you think he'll believe, Jack? Jack felt his head spin. He could almost hear everything collapsing, his job, his reputation, his boss's trust. Her voice held no joke. I understand." His voice was hoarse. 3 o'clock. "I'll be there." That afternoon, Jack entered the villa with the mind of a condemned man. The house was eerily quiet. Elena opened the door, wearing a thin aqua-colored dress, her hair up, looking suspiciously fresh. She smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. "What's this about, ma'am?" Jack stayed right by the door, not daring to step further in. "Come in first." Elena waved her hand, turning her back and walking into the living room. "It's very important." Jack had no choice but to follow, keeping a safe distance. She sat on the sofa, saying nothing about business. Instead, she began to talk, in a monotone, about a long, lonely day in the big house, about the ticking clock, about the cold walls. She paced the room, moving closer to where Jack stood rigidly. Then, when she got to the part about facing the darkness alone, she suddenly reached out and touched Jack's arm lightly. A jolt of electricity shot down his spine. Jack flinched violently, stumbling back 2 steps, his back hitting a bookshelf. "Sorry, I'm sorry," he stammered, his face ashen. The images of Sarah and Lily flashed vividly in his mind. I have to think of my daughter. She's waiting for me. I have to go." Without waiting for Elena's reaction, Jack turned and bolted out the door like a wounded animal, staggering across the courtyard. He started the car and sped away, his heart still pounding, the steering wheel slippery with sweat. He was a moth that had just escaped the flame, but could still smell its own singed wings. He knew he had just run away, but the battle wasn't over. The next morning, just after waking up, Jack's phone on the nightstand buzzed once. Another picture message from Elena. He opened it and his insides twisted. It was a close-up photo of his gray windbreaker. It was hanging neatly on a fancy wooden hanger against the familiar marble wall of her living room. Natural light shone on it, showing every seam, every thread. The caption read, "You left your things here again. Be more careful next time, or your wife might get suspicious." The smiley face at the end was like another cut of the knife. Jack understood this wasn't a reminder. This was evidence she had deliberately preserved and was now displaying. A piece of evidence proving his presence there, and an intimacy sufficient for him to have taken off his jacket. She was building a case, piece by piece. Jack deleted the message, but the image of the windbreaker was seared into his mind. He started avoiding every call, every message from that number. He turned off notifications, trying to live as if nothing had happened, even though he was falling apart inside. He hoped his silence would make her lose interest. But Elena wasn't one to give up easily. A week later, late one night after Sarah had gone to sleep, Jack's phone vibrated violently again. A long message. "You think silence is an escape? How naive. Richard is back. If you continue to avoid me, I'll tell him you're a hypocrite, that you've repeatedly flirted with me, taking advantage of my husband's absence to make advances. I have pictures of you in my house, messages where you agreed to come over. Who will he believe? A greedy driver or a wounded wife? Your career, your home, your little family. Do you want it all to turn to dust, Jack?" Jack read and reread the message under the dim light of his phone screen. Each word was like a fire ant crawling into his eyes, his ears, and his brain. A wave of intense nausea hit him, his throat constricting. He ran to the bathroom, knelt over the toilet, but only managed to retch up sour bile. He slumped onto the cold tile floor, leaning his head against the sink. His body shook in waves. He was trapped. On one side was the abyss, named Elena, with threats that could destroy everything. On the other side was his own home, growing colder by the day, with his wife's suspicious eyes. No way out. And in that moment of utter panic, as despair and fear choked his reason, a dark thought, tiny but razor-sharp, flashed through Jack's mind for the very first time, quick as lightning in the night. Is there a way to make this woman disappear for good? The pressure built up until every breath Jack took was heavy with worry. He lived on high alert, his ears always straining for the phone, his eyes darting to Sarah to gauge how much she knew. The small house that was once a refuge now felt like a mental prison, its silent walls full of unasked questions. One afternoon at the office, Jack slipped into the restroom and locked the door. His hands trembled as he opened his phone, his sweaty palms making the screen slippery. He had to tap several times to compose a short message to Elena, trying to politely refuse yet another demand from her. "Ma'am, I truly can't tonight. A family emergency." Just as his finger hovered over the send button, the phone screen suddenly turned blue and Sarah's name appeared with a video call icon. Jack's heart leaped into his throat. In a panicked reflex, he jabbed at the screen, ending the call abruptly. The restroom fell silent, only the sound of his ragged breathing remained. He stared at the now black phone screen as if looking at a bomb he'd just disarmed in the nick of time. Why a video call? Sarah almost never video calls during work hours. His heart hammered. He quickly called her back, trying to keep his voice as low as possible. "Hey, hun, did you just hang up on me?" Sarah's calm voice came from the other end. No, of course not," Jack said too quickly, his voice rising slightly. I was in the office bathroom. The phone just froze and hung up. Is everything okay?" A short but painfully long silence followed. "It's nothing. I just wanted to show you Lily in her new outfit." "Never mind." Sarah's voice was gentle. "Okay, you get back to work if you're busy." Click. She hung up. That single "okay," short, flat, and without a hint of agitation, sent a chill down Jack's spine. It wasn't angry. It wasn't questioning. It was too normal, as if she had accepted a clumsy lie. A bad, icy premonition crawled up his spine. Sarah knows. She might not be asking, but she knows something is wrong. That evening, dinner passed in a thick, oppressive silence, heavier than ever before. The clink of chopsticks on bowls, the sound of chewing, Lily's innocent chatter begging for candy, all felt isolated and disconnected. Sarah ate slowly, occasionally glancing at Jack, her gaze seeming to see right through the turmoil inside him. Each time Jack would bow his head, mechanically picking at his food, the rice turning tasteless and dry in his mouth. After Lily was asleep and Sarah finished cleaning the kitchen, she didn't go upstairs to bed as usual. She walked into the living room and sat on the couch right next to Jack, who sat slumped, staring blankly at the dark TV screen. She didn't speak, just sat there breathing softly. Then she gently placed her small, warm hand over Jack's. His hand was ice cold and clenched. Jack flinched but didn't pull away. That touch, that familiar warmth after so many days of distance, suddenly made him want to cry. Sarah turned to look at him. Her bright, deep eyes now held a weary concern, not anger. Her voice was gentle, sincere, like a whisper in the night. "Honey, I've noticed you're really different lately." Jack held his breath. "You avoid me," she continued, her voice full of sorrow. "You startle easily like you're lost in another world. You even talk in your sleep, mumbling things I can't make out. What's going on?" She squeezed his hand lightly. "Whatever pressure you're under, you can tell me. We're in this together, no matter how hard it gets. Don't keep it all bottled up." Those words, filled with trust, worry, and unconditional love, felt like warm water pouring over Jack's heart, which was shriveled with guilt and fear. Tears welled up, stinging his eyes. His throat tightened, a sob wanting to burst out. Tell her, confess everything, take the punishment. Anything is better than living like this. He looked into Sarah's eyes, where a fragile hope and expectation shone. Just 1 second, one confession, and this terrible burden would be shared. But immediately, other images flooded in, burying that intention. Elena with her crazed smile, Richard's look of utter disappointment, the scene of him being fired, pointed at, Sarah and Lily enduring everyone's scorn. The cowardice, the fear of losing everything, rose up stronger than ever. Jack swallowed the bitter tears. He forced a smile, dry and fake. He pulled his hand back and patted Sarah's hand. "It's nothing, really. Don't worry. It's just the new project at work. It's been a lot. I'm just tired. I'm sorry for making you worry lately." He saw it clearly. A light in Sarah's eyes went out. Disappointment, gentle but profound, flickered in their depths, then was replaced by a composed expression. She nodded slightly, said nothing more, and stood up. "Then you should rest early. Don't overthink it." She walked into the bedroom, leaving Jack alone in the dark living room, with the sound of his pounding heart and the feeling that he had just lost something precious. And that very night, after Sarah had fallen into a fitful sleep, the phone under Jack's pillow vibrated once again, like fate's reminder. A message from Elena, short and full of threat. "Tomorrow morning, 10 a.m., my house, last chance. If you don't come, I'll find a way to see you. Anywhere." Jack read the words under the cold blue light of the screen. His heart stopped. He knew exactly what those two words, anywhere, meant. It meant this very small house where Sarah and Lily were sleeping. She was going to cross the final line, to come here and shatter everything on the stage of his life. The final choice, in truth, was no longer a choice at all. Jack woke up that morning with heavy eyes and a hollow pit in his chest. Before he could even think about what to do with the threatening message from last night, his phone rang again, right on the breakfast table in front of Sarah. A call from Elena's number. Jack's heart seized. He quickly silenced the ringer, his face going pale. "Robocall," he stammered to Sarah, his voice dry. Sarah didn't say anything, just continued feeding Lily her oatmeal, but her eyes narrowed slightly. Less than a minute later, a barrage of long messages came through, filling his lock screen. "A silent treatment? Fine. Today at noon, 12 p.m., I'm coming to your office. If I can't find you there, I'm coming to your house. I think I need to have a frank chat with your wife, Sarah. Perhaps she'll understand better than you do, and we can find some common ground." Well, Jack read those lines, feeling like the world was tilting. The noise from the street, Lily's laughter, everything faded away. Only 3 words danced and burned in his vision. Coming to your house. Coming to... They drilled into his skull like 3 augers. She was about to cross the last boundary. She was about to invade his sanctuary, face Sarah, and expose everything in this tiny kitchen. The image of Elena standing at the door, with her sweetly poisonous smile, speaking her insinuations to his wife, made Jack's stomach clench with nausea. He stood up, legs trembling, and shuffled into the bedroom, closing the door. In the darkened room, he almost collapsed to his knees and called Elena. His voice choked, pleading. "Please, don't come to my house. I'll come this afternoon, anytime you want. I'm begging you." Elena on the other end was silent for a moment. Then her voice came through, cold and triumphant. 3 p.m., my house, don't keep me waiting. And so you don't forget, she paused. "I'm sending you a little gift to remind you how close we are." Click, she hung up. A few seconds later, Jack's phone buzzed once. Another picture message. His trembling hand opened it. This time it wasn't the windbreaker. It was a covertly taken photo. In the hazy frame under the sickly yellow lamplight, Jack was sleeping soundly on a large, luxurious, cream-colored bed. His sleeping face looked genuinely peaceful, even innocent. The frame was carefully cropped, not showing Elena, but the space, the bed, the lighting. Everything screamed that it was her bedroom. An undeniable intimacy, captured ruthlessly. The caption was a mocking whisper. "You slept so soundly, such a cute face. I wonder what Sarah would think if she saw this. Maybe she'd understand more about your work pressure." Jack slumped onto the icy cold floor. The phone slipped from his hand onto the carpet. He didn't cry, didn't scream. He just sat there like a corpse, while his inner world completely collapsed. She had it all. Irrefutable evidence. And she was willing to use it without hesitation. From the other room, Sarah's voice filtered in, clear and cruelly warm. "Let's read together, sweetie. Oh, Pasho, R-I-C, rice. Our rice is yummy, isn't it?" His wife's voice. The voice of peace, of the genuine love he was trampling on. Jack raised his head, his gaze piercing through the bedroom door. He saw the old motorcycle parked on the porch, the vehicle that had carried him through the years. He looked at the table, at the family photo taken at the park. All 3 of them smiling like sunshine. Sarah holding Lily, him holding them both. Simple, intact happiness. Then his eyes fell back to the phone lying on the carpet, its screen still lit with that dark photo. 2 opposing worlds lay before him. One side was everything he cherished, built with sweat and love. The other side was the consequence of one stupid moment of weakness, of prolonged cowardice, now gaping wide to swallow it all. A violent tremor started deep in Jack's bones, spreading through his whole body. Tears, this time not of fear, but of gut-wrenching remorse, of brutal awareness of what he was about to lose, streamed down his face uncontrollably. He cried, silently, the sounds catching in his throat. He cried for his own stupidity, for the lies that had hurt Sarah, for the image of the trustworthy father and husband he had shattered himself. But within those bitter, salty tears, something else began to kindle. A rage. Not at Elena, but first and foremost, at himself. Are you really going to let her take everything? Are you going to keep trembling, begging, living like a puppet until she cuts all the strings? He picked up the phone. His hand still shook, but he looked straight at the terrifying photo. Then, With a decisive motion, he deleted it. Deleted the message. Erased every trace from the screen. But he knew it still existed somewhere. He understood with painful clarity, continuing to run, continuing to be a slave to fear and Elena's threats, would guarantee he'd lose everything. He'd lose Sarah, Lily, his dignity, and finally, he'd lose the person he used to be. He'd become a cowardly shadow, unworthy of anyone's love. But if he stood up and faced it, no matter the outcome, even if he lost his job, was scorned, even faced Sarah's rage and pain, at least he'd keep one thing, his own conscience, and a fragile, thread-thin chance to protect what mattered most. The tears still fell, but Jack's face gradually regained an unusual calm. The calm of someone who had nothing left to lose, except one last shred of hope. He wiped his face, took a deep, shuddering breath, and opened his messaging app. He found the conversation with Elena, and this time, without trembling or pleading, he typed out each word slowly and clearly. This afternoon, 3 p.m. Where do you want to meet? We'll talk. For the last time. He pressed send. His heart pounded, but not from fear anymore. It was from a cold determination. The final desperate confrontation had to happen. When Jack walked into the familiar living room this time, Elena knew immediately something was different. It wasn't that he looked better. On the contrary, he looked exhausted, pale like someone who'd just recovered from a serious illness. But his eyes, which she was used to seeing full of panic, now held a strange stillness. He didn't bow his head or avoid her gaze. He walked in with the air of someone who had already settled everything. This unsettled Elena, who had been preparing for a triumphant session. She was sitting on the sofa, still in a seductive silk dress, about to start with a familiar taunt. So you finally decided to... Jack cut her off, his voice hoarse but clear, without a trace of a tremble. Elena. The two words came out with an unusual formality, silencing her. She raised an eyebrow, waiting. Jack stood straight, hands at his sides, not shoved in his pockets like before. He looked right at her, as if facing the bitter truth itself. I came here to tell you I was wrong. Elena gave a slight self-satisfied smile. Here we go. The begging starts. But Jack continued, his voice still even, as if recounting someone else's story. I was weak. I was a coward. I let one stupid minute, one moment of losing control drag me into this nightmare I never imagined. I was scared. First, of losing my job, of my boss, who's always been good to me, judging me. And now, he took a breath, his voice catching slightly, I'm 1,000,000 times more scared. I'm scared of losing my wife, of losing my daughter. The blunt confession of his own cowardice stunned Elena. She'd never heard anyone strip themselves bare like that, without mercy. But she tried to keep the upper hand, smirking. So what, you're here to say sorry and hope I forget everything? No. Jack shook his head, a slow, definitive shake. The calmness in his eyes turned hard. I'm not here to ask for your forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I'm here to tell you, I'm stopping right here, right now. Before Elena could process it, Jack went on, each word hammered into place. You want to tell Richard something? Go ahead. Wanted to send the photos you have to my wife? Go ahead. I'll stand here and accept all the consequences, but, He paused, looking deep into Elena's eyes, and for the first time, his voice held a real plea. Not out of fear, but for something higher. But I'm asking you, with all sincerity, please don't lay a hand on my family yourself. Don't come to my house. Don't talk to my wife. I'll resign. I'll disappear from the company, from your and Richard's lives. You'll never have to see me again. The room fell silent. Elena sat there, her face slowly paling. She hadn't expected this. Jack wasn't begging her to keep the secret. He was surrendering. But it was a conditional surrender, even a counter-threat. He was willing to let it all blow up, as long as she didn't touch his family. Anger began to boil inside Elena. She sprang to her feet, her face flushing with fury. You think you can just run away and be done with it? Who do you think I am? Your toy? You play when you want and throw away when you're bored? Who do you think you are? Her voice rose to a shriek full of offense. You hurt me. You think you can just disappear? She stepped closer to Jack, breathing heavily, her eyes showing a threatening madness. But Jack, this time, didn't retreat. He stood there like a burned-out log, with nothing left to burn. He quietly pulled his phone from his pocket, not to check a message, but to open a pre-written text. He turned the screen toward Elena. On it was a long message, the recipient, Sarah, and a small line below, delayed send, 3 hours. I'm not running, Jack said, his voice low. I'm facing it, and I've already prepared for the worst outcome. If I don't cancel this message in 3 hours, it will send automatically. In it, I've told my wife everything, from beginning to end. I've apologized to her, and I accept whatever decision she makes. Elena stared intently at the phone screen, then back into Jack's eyes that held no fear, only exhaustion, remorse, and a strange acceptance. The furious rage bubbling inside her suddenly snuffed out. It died, leaving behind a cold, empty void that was frightening. She took a step back as if shocked. The triumphant, crazed look vanished, replaced by something incomprehensible. It was emptiness. And within that emptiness, a flicker of envy of how Jack, even after his fall, even as a coward, could now stand up for something called family. And deeper still, an ancient sorrow, her own pain, as someone who had nothing to protect, nothing to lose, except the loneliness in this cold villa. She turned her face away, not wanting Jack to see her expression anymore. And in the air, tense as a wire about to snap, Elena laughed. A bitter, weary laugh that echoed dryly in the spacious room. The laugh held no joy. It sounded like something breaking inside her. Then, unexpectedly, from those green eyes that always held sadness and emptiness, 2 tears rolled down silently, tracing paths down her perfectly made-up cheeks. They fell, leaving 2 small streaks like cracks in an expensive porcelain doll. Elena's bitter laugh and tears slowly faded, leaving behind a heavy, awkward silence full of shame and pain. She didn't wipe her tears, just let them fall, ruining her perfect makeup, revealing a tired face older than her years. Jack stood motionless. All his anger and fear seemed blown away by an unexpected wind. In its place was profound shock. He looked at Elena, no longer a prickly porcupine, a threatening madwoman, but just a crying woman in a room that was too big and too cold. Elena jerked her chin toward a fancy wooden cabinet holding a large family portrait. In it, Richard stood stiffly in a suit, and she wore an evening gown, both smiling. But the smiles looked more like decorations than real happiness. See? Elena's voice trembled, full of bitterness. He travels for a month at a time. When he's home for a few days, he's either in his office or on calls with clients. This house, it's beautiful, it's luxurious, everyone admires it. But for me, it's a prison. A prison without bars, but with no way out either. She turned to look at Jack, her tear-filled eyes blazing with a loneliness so stark it made his heart clench. I'm lonely, Jack. So lonely, I sometimes thought I'd go crazy. And you? She paused, swallowing hard. You were the only one, in a long time, who paid attention to me, who listened to me complain, and who comforted me. Even if that comfort came from your moment of weakness and my moment of despair. Jack opened his mouth, perhaps to say something awkwardly comforting, but Elena shook her head as if reading his mind. She wiped her tears hastily with the back of her hand, a childlike wounded gesture. Then her voice grew colder, more lucid, as if she was trying to put her shell back on. I know what I was doing. I wanted to destroy you, she said bluntly, not hiding it, because I was jealous, insanely jealous. Jack frowned, not understanding. I was jealous because you still had something to lose, Elena burst out, her voice choked with resentment. You were still afraid of losing your job, your reputation, and above all, your wife, your daughter. And me? She pointed to her own chest. I have nothing left to lose but money and loneliness in this tomb. I pressured you, threatened you, because I wanted to see you suffer like I'm suffering. I wanted someone to sink in this misery with me, so I wouldn't feel so alone. That confession, dark and brutally honest, sent a shiver down Jack's spine. It wasn't the plot of a mean-spirited person, but the desperate cry of a soul withering away. But I was wrong, Elena continued, her voice growing softer, full of self-reproach. What you did today, standing here saying you'd sacrifice your job, everything, just to protect your little family, it shamed me, because it reminded me of a truth. My husband, Richard, the man I once thought was my world, would never do that for me. Never knew. Her voice broke. I'm just an expensive piece of jewelry to him. Bought, shown off, then put back in the box. She took a deep, shuddering breath, as if taking a final gulp of air, then looked straight at Jack. The madness in her eyes was gone, replaced only by endless weariness and something almost like self-pity. Delete that delayed message, she said flatly. I don't need you to confess to your wife, and those pictures, I'll delete them all. Jack stared, not believing his ears. Elena smiled, a faint, bitter smile. You should know. I'm letting you go not because I'm afraid or because I'm a good person. She paused, her voice turning sharp and cold, a final warning. It's because I see you still care for your wife and child. You still have a family to protect, to fear losing. For me right now, that's an impossible luxury. She looked at Jack, her gaze piercing. Treasure it, and never be weak again, because the next trap might not let you go. Jack stood silent, 1,000 mixed emotions rushing over him. He didn't know what to say. Thank you. That sounded absurd and fake. Comfort her? What right did he have? In the end, he could only bow his head, a deep bow, not of a loser, but of shock and an unnamed pity. Then he turned and walked out of that luxurious living room, this time without haste or panic. The heavy wooden door closed behind him with a low, dull thud, like sealing a chapter of hell in his life. The golden afternoon sun shone directly on Jack's face, warm and brilliant, a stark contrast to the cold yellow lights of the villa. He took a deep breath, feeling 1,000-pound weight lift from his chest, a burden he'd carried for so many days. The outside air was fresh and free. But immediately another, heavier, more complex feeling crept in. It was pity. Pity for Elena's shattered life, for the extreme loneliness she was holding. And guilt, not the guilt of betraying Sarah, but the guilt of having been, knowingly or not, at a piece in her tragedy. And then getting to walk away, leaving her in her own private hell. He pulled out his phone, opened the app, and found the delayed message to Sarah. His finger hovered over the cancel button. For a second, he thought he should still send it, for complete peace. But Elena's final words echoed, treasure it. He pressed cancel. The long message vanished. The darkest secret might be buried forever, but Jack knew, even without the photos, without the threats, it had all. The lies, the terror, the cowardice, and even the pity, carved a deep crack in his soul. A crack he would carry for the rest of his life. A permanent reminder of the seemingly kind trap he had almost failed to escape. The next morning, Jack put on his best suit, the one he only wore for important occasions. But today was not a happy day. His heart was heavy as he walked into the familiar office building where boss Richard had treated him kindly for years. Richard was sitting in his spacious office, morning sun streaming through the large window. Seeing Jack, he smiled warmly. Jack, come in. What's going on? Jack stood straight before the desk, hands clenched behind his back. His throat was dry. He had rehearsed this lie all night, but facing his boss's bright eyes and respectable demeanor now, he felt small and despicable. Sir, Jack began, his voice slightly shaky, I'm here to resign. Richard frowned, his face full of surprise and concern. Resign? What's wrong? Is something the matter? Jack lowered his head, not daring to look him in the eye. Yes, sir. My father back in my hometown. He's seriously ill. It's complicated, needs long-term care. I'm the eldest son, I have to go back. I'm really sorry for the sudden notice. The lie flowed out smoothly, but each word burned his conscience like a hot coal. Richard listened, sighed with regret, and stood up. He walked around the desk and placed a hand on Jack's shoulder. I'm very sorry to hear that. Family comes first. You go take care of your father. Then he turned back to his desk, took out a check, and wrote a few lines quickly. He handed it to Jack. Here, an extra month's salary bonus. A little help in a difficult time. And remember, he looked at Jack sincerely, when things are stable at home and you want to come back to work, just call me. Your spot is still here. Jack took the check, his hand trembling. This kindness, which should have made him grateful, now felt like a knife slicing into his guilt-ridden heart. He bowed deeply, his voice choked. Thank you, sir. I'm truly sorry. Leaving the skyscraper, the bright midday sun didn't warm Jack. He didn't feel relief. The real material burden was just beginning. And above all, he had to face Sarah, with her questioning silence waiting for him at home. That evening, after Lily was fast asleep, the atmosphere in the living room grew tense with quiet. Sarah sat on the sofa, holding a glass of water, her eyes looking out the dark window. Jack took a deep breath and sat down beside her. He gently placed his hand over hers, small, slightly cold. Sarah flinched slightly but didn't pull away. Honey, Jack began, his voice hoarse with emotion. I'm sorry, the past while, I've been like a ghost. Sarah turned to look at him, her bright eyes now filled with weary sadness. I let work pressure, petty worries, turn me into someone cold and distant from you and our daughter. Jack swallowed. tears beginning to sting his nose. I made you worry. I hurt you. I was wrong. I was so wrong. He paused, gathering courage for the next part. I quit my old job. That job, the pressure was too much. It was killing me inside and killing our family. I couldn't do it anymore. Sarah's eyes widened in surprise. I'm going to drive for a ride-sharing service, Jack continued, his voice growing steadier as if convincing himself. It might be tougher, driving day and night. The income might be unstable, not steady like before. But I promise you, he squeezed her hand, I'll spend more time with you and Lily. I'll earn an honest living with my own labor and come home on time. We'll get through this together, okay? Jack looked into Sarah's eyes, waiting for an answer, a rebuke, or even a shake of the head. Sarah was silent for a long time. Tears rolled slowly down her cheeks, silently without a sob. Then she nodded, a very soft, very slow nod. She didn't ask why, didn't demand a more detailed explanation about those late work meetings or the sleeping photo. She just leaned her head on Jack's shoulder, her voice as soft as a breeze. I don't need you to make a lot of money. I just need you healthy, happy, and truly present for us. As long as we have each other, as long as we love each other, we'll get through anything. Those words, full of forgiveness and understanding, were like an antidote for Jack's shriveled heart. He hugged his wife tightly, letting his tears fall into her hair. He knew he didn't deserve this forgiveness. And he silently promised at any cost to be better, to cherish every moment, to make up for the dark days that had passed. A new, genuinely hard life began. Jack signed up as a rideshare driver. There were days he drove from dawn until late at night, his back aching, the income barely enough after gas and car maintenance. Some rides took him all over the city, and sometimes the navigation app led him past the familiar road into the upscale villa district where Richard and Elena lived. Every time, even just passing the gate, Jack's heart would pound unreasonably. His breath would catch. He'd glance into the back seat through the rearview mirror, empty, but for a moment, he'd imagine Elena sitting there, with her cold green eyes and a haunting smile. He'd quickly turn away or speed up to get past that stretch. He knew he'd been lucky to escape. But the memory of his ultimate weakness, the fear of losing everything, and the image of a lonely woman crying in an empty room would haunt him like a psychological scar, perhaps never fully healing. And then, one drizzly evening, after a hard day's work, Jack drove back to his familiar small alley. It was dark, the rain misty, but the warm yellow light from his window was still on. He turned off the car, got out, exhausted all over. As he opened the door, a warm, familiar scent rushed out. The fragrant smell of freshly cooked rice, the sweet and sour aroma of fish soup bubbling on the stove, the sound of little feet pattering on the floor, and Lily beaming as she hugged his leg. "Daddy's home! Daddy's all wet!" Sarah stepped out of the kitchen, still holding chopsticks, a hint of tiredness on her face, but with a gentle smile. "Wash your hands, honey. Let's eat. Hot fish soup's ready." In that moment, standing in the small house, with the warmth radiating from the kitchen, his daughter's laughter, and his wife's smile, Jack truly understood. This simple family meal, this heartbreakingly simple peace, was what he had almost lost forever, all because of a moment of weakness, before a trap of fake kindness and glamorous power. He cherished it more than anything in the world. But as he sat down at the table, watching Sarah serve food to their daughter, sometimes her gaze would linger absently in mid-air, a hint of thoughtfulness crossing her face, and Jack would wonder, would the scar his lies and panic left in her heart ever truly heal? And would that dark past ever come back one day, when the villa gate opened again, demanding the price he thought he'd escaped? There was no answer. The question hung in the warm air of the dinner table, a nagging reminder. Some mistakes, even if buried, change your life forever, and the lesson of appreciation sometimes comes at a very high price.